Hey everybody, so in this video today we're going to talk about how there's only 5 scales that you need to know to get started learning jazz improvisation. Let's get to it. Before I start this video, I just want to say this, and I didn't say this until too late in the video, so I'm putting this at the beginning. There will be a PDF of some of the stuff I'm talking about in this video, in the description of this video. So at any point there's anything that you're confused about that you want to check out, look at the PDF in the description and have a look at that, and that'll give you basically all the information I'm describing in this video. Okay, let's get to it. Okay, so before anybody comments on this video, yes, obviously I know there's more than 5 types of scales. There's a bunch, you know, depending on how you look at it, there's hundreds, thousands, but these 5 that we're going to talk about today are the most important 5 that helped me really get my head wrapped around how to play jazz language, basically, especially bebop, which is still 50% of what a lot of musicians play. I mean, I play probably about 60%, you know, bebop style stuff in my playing, and then everything else builds on top of that. So I'm going to start this video with a little bit of a personal anecdote. The reason I kind of developed this system is because as I was learning this music, I was kind of struggling as a young musician. I would have trouble with playing tunes and making chord changes, and I didn't even really know what was wrong. I thought I was doing everything right. I would, you know, play a tune. I would learn a tune. Like, let's say I was learning Green Dolphin Street. I'd play through Green Dolphin Street. I would play every chord tone up the chord, basically. I'd do that a few times, and then I would maybe play some pentatonics, and I would then try to get into soloing and putting stuff on the chord changes. And I was so frustrated because every time I would go to a lesson or I'd go play with an older musician, they would tell me things like, you're not making the changes, or I can't hear the tune in your solo, or all the stuff you're playing doesn't make any sense. And it was so frustrating. It was really frustrating and heartbreaking as a young person because I was trying so hard to play this music. I was really trying hard to make this stuff sound like, you know, the music I liked. And I would listen to recordings of myself and I would go, man, why doesn't this sound like any of the music I'm listening to? It doesn't sound like Coltrane. It doesn't sound like Dexter Gordon. It doesn't sound like Sonny Rollins or Sonny Stitt. It doesn't sound like any of that stuff. It just sounds like me, and I don't like that, you know? But it wasn't until I, you know, found the right mentors, basically, to show me this kind of stuff, show me what I was doing wrong, and show me exactly how to fix it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain this stuff kind of in a way that I learned it, and then explain how I developed it so that I could practice it and get into my playing better, basically. So first of all, what are the 5 scales? You know, I've been talking a lot this time. What are the 5 scales you need to know? Well, in my opinion, those 5 scales are the major scale, harmonic minor, melodic minor, diminished, and whole tone. The good thing about that is those 5 scales are probably scales that you already know, especially if you're a young musician, maybe you're high school or college level. You probably already know some, if not most of these, and are probably already trying to use them in your improvisations. But it's not just the scales themselves. Obviously, just knowing the scales is one thing, but knowing how to play them, and especially knowing how jazz musicians have used them in their improvisations, is really important, and that's pretty much what the topic of this video is going to be about. Also, I should say, just as a caveat, a lot of what I'm going to be saying here refers to how to play these scales like on dominant chords, because when you're playing bebop, when you're playing standards, a lot of what you're doing is resolving dominant chords to tonic chords. What you're doing is creating the sound of a chord change, right? That's why we call them chord changes, because you hear the chord changing. Duh. So with the major scale, in order to turn this into the dominant scale that we want, which is I just call it the regular dominant scale. And I should also note that I don't like to think of it as a different scale from major. I still think of it as the major scale. The way I think about it is the major scale has 2 sounds in it. It has the tonic sound and the dominant sound. What's really beautiful about the major scale, I think, is that it already has all of the information you need in it to make music, except for one thing, and we're going to add it when we learn how to play this scale. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up to the 5th note of the scale, which is going to be the note that's the root note of our dominant chord. So if we're in the key of C, we're going to go up to G. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a passing note in between G and F. So that is going to give you what we all know as the dominant 7 bebop scale. But I just like to call it either the dominant scale, or really, I just like to think about it as the major scale. So when I'm playing this scale, or I should say when you're playing this scale, when anybody's playing this scale, basically what's going to happen is, now that you have an 8-note scale, you can play the scale in 8th notes and every chord tone lands on a beat. And the chord tones you're going to have are going to be G, B, D, and F, and it's going to outline G7. And you can start the scale from any of these chord tones and continue running it down the chord tones as you go along. So I'm going to play from each one of the chord tones so that you can hear what it sounds like. Check this out. So as you're playing the scale, you also have the choice to play arpeggios, and arpeggios are a very important part of playing bebop. You know, when you listen to Charlie Parker, Sonny Stitt, you hear them going up arpeggios, down scales, up arpeggios, down scales all the time. I mean, this isn't even a jazz thing. You can go back and listen to Bach and hear this. I mean, it's a very common musical gesture that has been, you know, in Western music for hundreds of years at this point. So there's 4 arpeggios that you can use, and each one of them can be played alternating with the scale. So the first arpeggio is just G7. The second one is B half diminished. The third is D minor 7. And then the fourth one is going to be F major 7. So here's what each one of those sounds like. And you'll notice that each one of those, except for the G7, lands on a chord tone whenever you go up. Whenever you go up, the next note is going to be a chord tone, basically. And don't worry about that G7 where you land on the non-chord tone. We'll talk about how to play non-chord tones a little bit later. So as you're playing the scale, you have a choice. Whenever you hit another chord tone, you can choose to either continue the scale down, or you can play an arpeggio. That's why you get lines that sound like this. Here I'm going to start from the root, and I'm going to go down to the third, and I'm going to play up an arpeggio. That's a whole line that you could play over G7 going to C. And at the end there, I omitted the passing tone and landed on an E to make it sound like I was going to C major. So the way that you want to practice this stuff is, first, I start by just doing the scale and getting the scale really under your fingers. So what you can do is play the scale and go around the circle of fifths and choose different chord tones. So for example, I might go around all the dominant scales using just the thirds, and that might sound something like this. Etc., etc., basically. The more you do that, you want to build up the speed so that you can play it faster, just like you would practice any other scale. And luckily, if you already know how to play your major scale, which you should be doing already anyway, then this is not going to be that hard to get under your fingers, basically. And then as you're building up speed, as you're doing more practicing, what I like to do is eventually start practicing, you know, running scale into arpeggio around the cycle. So you might do something like this. There I was going 3rd to 7th and then up the arpeggio on the 7th every time. So if you just practice your scales and arpeggios, that's going to give you 2/3 of all of the stuff you need for bebop language, basically. The other third is all of the chromatic enclosures and approach tones and all the little licks that jazz musicians like to play leading into these things. And truly, those are probably the most important part, but they're the hardest to, you know, categorize. The best place to get those is to check out solos and transcribe and find little ones that you like. Here's a little one that I like to use. Usually I'll use this one to start off some kind of line. Check this out. So there I played basically circling around the third. So there you can see that there's a lot of options you have when you're playing. You can either continue the scale, you can play an arpeggio, or you can play some kind of embellishment. And that's basically 90% of the major scale. The other part is what we call the major bebop scale. But personally, this might be a little controversial. To me, this scale is a little bit misunderstood. When it's played melodically in an improvisation, a lot of times, and I've heard, you know, great musicians tell me this, so I'm not just making this up. I mean, I've heard Vincent Herring say this. You can check this out. He said this before. But what you can do with the major bebop scale, mostly it's used to connect the 1 to the 5, or get to the 5 from the 1. So if you start on C, for example, and then run down the major bebop scale, what you're going to do is you're going to end up on a G eventually, and then you can continue down the G7 scale as you go. It might be something like this. So there, I played a little lick where I started on the 3rd of C, and then I ran all the way down to the 5th, and once I got to the 5th, I added the passing tone between the 6th and the 5th and 6th, basically, like you do in the major bebop scale. And then once I got to the 5th, I switched to dominant mode. And this is something that, you know, I've seen in a couple solos. I've seen Coltrane use the major bebop scale just straight, like on a major 1, which is cool. But a lot of times, cats are going to use it to connect 5 to 1, or even sometimes 1 to 5. Like you could play it like this. You could play that at the end of a line to punctuate your some kind of dominant line, or drive to the end of some kind of, I don't know, any kind of 2-5-1 line, or whatever you happen to be playing at the time. So one thing I want to cover before I move on is how to start on, you know, the non-chord tones. And for the non-chord tones, you have a lot of options actually. You can either, one, you can do nothing. You can actually put no half steps in the scale. You can take away the 1 half step that you play, and eventually you'll end up back on tracks. Like for example, if you start on the 9th, right away, by the time you get to the 2nd beat, if you're playing 8th notes, you're going to be on the 7th. Like, check this out. If I start on A, for example, I'm going to be on an F by beat 2. By the time I got to the end there, I was all the way at the all the way at the G on beat 1 of the next measure. You can also either play a quarter note or a triplet to kind of rhythmically delay the next note. So this is why a lot of jazz musicians will play things like this. You know, that's a classic Charlie Parker lick. You hear that all the time encircling the 4th or the 9th or something like that. That allows you to get right back on track with the chord tones. You can also add in half steps. So if you start, for example, on the 13th, you might do something like this. There, I added a D flat. I added a sharp 11 basically to the chromatic line so that I would end up on the 3rd by the next beat. There's all kind of ways you can add half steps, and I am going to include a PDF with this video. So if you look in the description, there's going to be a link to a PDF that has a lot of the stuff I'm talking about in this video. So if there's anything you're confused about, anything you need to check over, just look down at the PDF. The PDF is only going to cover the major scale, but the other scales are going to follow kind of a similar pattern. So once you get the major scale stuff under your fingers, everything else is going to fall into place. So basically that's it with the major scale. You've got the dominant scale, and then you've got the arpeggios. And basically what I would recommend is just practice building lines using these elements. What I would encourage is for you to not think of these as licks, but to come up with your own ideas and play around with these things to find things that you like. And eventually, the way you really want to practice this stuff is on tunes. So take a line that you like and figure out how to put it on all the dominants on a tune. So you could take a song like Just Friends, for example, and on every dominant chord, you can play all of this stuff. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned yet is obviously minor chords, like minor chords that go with the 5. But to me, this is a really important thing. I should have said this earlier. The 5 chord and the 2 chord are the same. I'm going to say that again. The 5 chord and the 2 chord are the same. To me, I think whenever I see a 2-5, I just think of it as one chord, basically, that you can play all the same stuff on. And that's why, you know, when I play the scale, I usually play it descending, because when you play it descending, it emphasizes the dominant sound. It emphasizes the sound of the scale resolving to 1, basically. So I've spent a lot of time talking about major. The next one is harmonic minor. And the good news about harmonic minor is it's actually very similar to major. In fact, it works the same way. So what we're going to do, we're going to take C harmonic minor. We're in the key of C still. C harmonic minor, go up to the 5th, and add a passing tone. And that's going to give you these 4 starting points, basically, whenever you start on the notes of G7. It's going to sound like these. And then same thing, you have arpeggios that you can play on them. So they sound like this. On the 7th, you actually have 3 arpeggios you can play. There I played a minor 7 arpeggio, F minor 7, but you can also play F half diminished, and you can play a fully diminished. So here are the 3 different choices. So there you can see there's a couple different sounds you can use. And that's really it for harmonic minor. Harmonic minor is basically the exact same as major. It just has 2 notes different. So instead of having an E and a A, you're going to have an E flat and an A flat, which is going to give you the flat 9 and flat 13 on the dominant chord. And these are great sounds. If you listen to any kind of, minor song that has minor chords, you can hear musicians using this stuff a lot. Bird was great at this, Sonny Stitt. All the great musicians that you love, they were the kings and queens of doing this stuff, basically. So the next scale is melodic minor. And I could talk a lot about melodic minor. In fact, I'm probably going to do a more full video of melodic minor. But melodic minor is probably, I like to call it, it's like a shapeshifter scale, really. You can play it on anything. And there's a lot of different uses for melodic minor. But when it comes to just playing like bebop, dominant language, there's a specific way that we play melodic minor. So for melodic minor, if we're playing a G7, we're actually not going to use C melodic minor. We're going to use A flat melodic minor. So we go up a half step to A flat melodic minor, and we're going to play that scale from G. But we're also going to do something a little bit different. Instead of adding that passing tone, we're going to take away a note. We're going to take the D flat out of the scale, and we're going to play it as a 6-note scale. And when you play it as a 6-note scale, what it's going to give you is it's going to give you the root, the sharp 9, and the flat 13. So in this case, you're going to get 3 different ways to play the scale. Here they are. I'm going to play it for you, starting from G. So those are the 3 chord tones you have. And what's great about this scale is it not only works for minor, it also works for major. So you can resolve to C major or C minor, depending on what the context is. There's 2 different ways of using it. I use this scale a lot on many different occasions, many different contexts. What's great about this is it gives you what we call the altered dominant sound. And that sound is used all over jazz. You've probably heard this millions of times on different recordings, and you might have not even recognized it, but it's a great sound. And like I said, it can be used in a lot of different places. For example, that melodic minor can also be used as the minor 4 in the key of E flat. So there's a lot of potential for, cross-shifting between keys. But if you're just looking to play G7 altered, learn the A flat melodic minor scale. And you should learn all the melodic minor scales that go with whatever dominant, all of the altered dominant melodic minor scales. So for example, on C, you'd play C sharp melodic minor. On D, you play E flat melodic minor. And this 6-note scale is really lovely. I like to play it because just hearing it, it has so much melodic potential, much like the major scale, which is, like I said, is kind of beautiful because you can hear music in it already when you play it. This melodic minor scale to me is the same way. Here, I'm just going to play around with it for a little bit. There I was kind of using it as like a minor 4 sound, or maybe even like a major with a sharp 5 sound, but that's just an example of what you can do with it. I think it's a great scale. It's one I play all the time. Whenever I can find a use for that scale, I love to throw it in. This scale also has some arpeggios you can play in it, and to me, those arpeggios are usually built on the like the A flat minor major 7 chord, using some, starting from some different notes. But I will leave it to you, the viewer, to figure that stuff out. I want you to go practice this stuff. I can't give you every secret. So the last 2 scales are diminished and whole tone, and diminished you could probably talk a lot about, but for the sake of what we're learning here, diminished, usually you're going to use only fragments of it, but when you play diminished, the good thing about diminished is it has 8 notes in it already. And so you can start from any of the chord tones and run the scale all the way down, and by the first beat of the next measure, you're on that same chord tone you started on. So for example, on G7, you're going to use your G half whole diminished scale, except you're going to play it going down, which maybe would make it into the opposite. You know, it's going to go whole step, half step kind of, but it's still the one that starts on G and there's a half step above it. And what's good about this is that all 4 of those chord tones are actually the root of different diminished scales, or all 4 of the chord tones you're going to get, which in this case are going to be, G, B flat, D flat, and E. And typically when I use this, I actually use this more going to major resolutions because it already has a natural 13 in it and it can sound weird going to minor. Like I said, diminished you could talk about a lot. Diminished is one of the most useful sounds in jazz. It's everywhere. But just for the purposes of this video, I'd rather keep it short and just say that's the basic way you're going to use it. And then, of course, the last scale is whole tone. And whole tone has 6 notes, so we don't have to do anything different to it. Whole tone has a lot of great possibilities, but much like the diminished, I think, once again, I'm going to leave it to you to practice it. But you can also, this is another one that works great going to either major or minor. So, for example, if you start on G and run the scale down, you can resolve to the major or the minor third. There I landed on E the first time and E flat the second time. Okay, so that's about everything. I hope I haven't forgotten anything. This video is a little bit long-winded, but I think it's really important to think about it this way. And there's a reason I like to think about it as just 5 scales. See, I don't like to think about the modes of the major scale. I think the modes are good to know, especially for technique and just for having like that music theory knowledge in your head. But to me, they don't really reflect what the musicians were playing in the 40s, 50s, and early 60s. Even in modal jazz, quote unquote, I don't really think they were thinking about the modes at the way that they're taught often. To me, everything comes from the major or the minor scales, and it's just different ways of playing them. And a lot of this too has to do with what I was saying earlier about the unity between 2 and 5. That's another thing, you know, I didn't make up. If you listen to anything that Barry Harris says, he says this all the time. When you see a 5, or excuse me, when you see a 2-5, you just play 5, right? And you can hear this. If you listen to different recordings, sometimes in a 2-5, they don't play the 2. Or sometimes they play only 2. You know, it just depends on what's going on. So to me, this simplifies everything. It's just saying it's 5 scales and different ways to play these 5 scales. The most important one being the major scale, of course, because everything comes from that. But then also adding in harmonic and melodic minor to give you those extra minor and altered dominant sounds. And then, of course, diminished and whole tone are kind of like the cherry on top. Those are absolutely, you know, totally essential for anybody making any jazz, any 21st, 20th century music, basically. Okay, thanks everybody for watching this video. Before we go, I just want to remind you, there will be a PDF in the description, so check that out. The PDF is going to have all the major scale information. Then all you got to do to adapt this to harmonic minor is just change a couple notes. And then for melodic minor, you just remove a note. So that's it. Make sure to follow me on Instagram. I'm posting a lot of little videos. And if you are interested in saxophone or jazz improvisation, ear training, music theory lessons, you can send me an email. My email is going to be down in the description. I have some slots open for some students and flexible availability. We can do online lessons if you're interested in that. And I hope everybody has an amazing day, and I will see you all in the next video.